Okay, boys and girls, if you notice, I kind of changed my scenery a little bit. So when you're getting your materials together, just make sure that you have paper, pencil, or something to write with. If you have just a regular size paper, that's fine. Okay, so I'm just giving you some time to get some paper, some materials together. While you're doing that, I'm going to go over what we're going to do together. Okay, so this right here is a food web. What we're going to do together right now is we're going to identify all of the food chains inside this food web. What a food web really shows you is how many food chains can exist within one environment. So that's what we're going to look at today. So just give yourself another maybe 10-15 seconds, get those materials together. As soon as we're done going over this, I'm going to give you some animals to write down, and then you're going to try to put the food web together yourself at home. All right, so you should have all your stuff together now. Let's take a look at what I have here. So if you can see, I put all of our animals right here on this chart. So we have a mix of different animals and plants. Let's look down here. Let's read everything. We have corn, plant, lavender, mangoes, fruit fly, butterfly, grasshopper, frog, rat, wolf, python. Over here we have eagle, thrush, dragonfly, I believe I said fruit fly and mangoes over here. So just like with a food chain, we have to draw the arrows inside the food web to show the transfer of energy. So let's take a look over here. Let's start down here with the corn, okay? The corn is going to get eaten by the grasshopper. So I'm going to draw my arrow there, okay? The grasshopper is going to get eaten by a frog. Okay, it will also get eaten by a rat, and the rat will give its energy to the python. So we've started basically here a food chain. If you notice, the grasshopper has two arrows coming off of it because it gives energy not only to the rat, but also to the frog. Okay, let's come back to the bottom and we'll work our way back up again, and then I'll show you how they really intertwine with one another. So here, down here, we have a plant. Should really be some type of a flowering plant. So that kind of flowering plant would give its energy to the butterfly. Okay, the butterfly would give energy to the frog. And this frog also gives energy to the python. So already within this food web, we've identified 2, possibly 3 different food chains. So let's keep going. Let's come back down to the bottom with the lavender. So the lavender could give energy to the butterfly. The lavender gives energy to the butterfly, Then we'll switch over to the mangoes. The mango gives energy to the fruit fly. Okay, this fruit fly gives energy to the dragonfly, to the thrush. Thrush is a type of bird. Fruit fly also gives energy to the frog. Okay, now let's move up here to the dragonfly. The dragonfly gives energy to the frog as well. Okay, this thrush gives energy to the eagle. The frog is actually going to give energy to the eagle. And the python gives energy to the eagle as well. This rat gives energy to the wolf and also gives energy to that eagle. So if we take a look at this, if you look at all of these arrows here, I'll move you in a little bit closer. You can see how they really are all intertwined with one another. Now, within this food web, We also have our producers that we talked about earlier in our segment. We have our primary consumers and we have our secondary consumers. I want you to take a second, look at this chart, and tell me where we could find our producers, our primary consumers, and secondary consumers. So take a second here. I'm going to grab my index card so that we can label them. So take a second, see if you can identify any of those for me. All right, hopefully you were able to identify some of those from what we learned earlier. So let's start at our producers. Where would the producers be inside a food web? Where would you find your producers? They would be down at the bottom, right? Our plants give energy to everything else, kind of like what we discussed at the beginning. All of these down here would be producers. They would be your first layer in any food web. Now remember, what would be right here if we really wanted to that gives energy to those plants and those producers? The sun, right. The sun would be down here, which would give all of the energy right here to these producers. Where would your primary consumers be? Good, your primary consumers would be the next level, right on top of your producers. So your primary consumers would be right in here. You would have your grasshopper would be the primary consumer. The butterfly is also a primary consumer. The fruit fly would also be a primary consumer. Now, what about a secondary consumer? Good. That would be your next layer. So your secondary consumers would be right kind of in the middle, okay? For this specific food web, your secondary consumer would be the rat, the frog, the dragonfly. Those would all be secondary consumers. Depending on how large the food web is, you could also do, your third consumers and so on and so forth up your food web. You guys did an excellent job doing this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some examples to write down. So this is where your paper and pen or pencil, whatever you have, comes in handy. Let me take this down. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of what I want you to write down. Okay, if you just have regular paper, you can actually just cut it right up the middle, cut it in half, and then cut it in half again, and you'll get smaller cards. Look somewhat like this. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I want you to write down. This way you can get those written down, and then you can try to set up your food web. Okay, so the first one to write down, rabbit. The next one, birds. Next, mouse. Next, carrot. Whoops. Carrot. Okay. Grains. Grasshopper. Fox. Owl. And grass. Okay, they were not in any type of order. So if you have all those written down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some time. Use the floor in front of you, use the table, whatever space that you have, wherever you are right now, and try to organize your cards so that they set up like a food web. If you have extra paper, you can do arrows so that you could see that transfer of energy within the food web. If you don't, if you could just lay them on the floor, the best that you can. And what we're gonna do is I'm gonna put it together for you right here. So I'm gonna give you a minute, maybe a little bit less than a minute, and have you set that up. So I'll give you some time while I set up my cards. Okay, remember what would be at the bottom? Anything that produces energy by itself, those would be your plants. Next would kind of be smaller animals. So just keep that in mind when you're setting up the cards on the floor. All right, so I'm gonna get started. Hopefully you were able to get some of your cards in order on the floor. So one of our first things that should be at the bottom, of course, would be grass. Okay, maybe I should move that down so we have some more space. Okay, so our grass should be down there. Were there any other producers that you noticed? Another one should be carrot. Very good. We'll put this one kind of over here. And then there was actually one more producer in this mix. Should have been the grains. And we'll put them over here. Okay, so far we have our 3 producers are in our food web. We have carrot, grass, and grains. All right, out of the animals that I gave you, what do you think would eat that? Carrot. Rabbit. Excellent, boys and girls. We're going to put this here. I'm going to save my arrows for the end. Okay. Now, if I'm thinking to myself, if I look at these animals and I want to continue maybe with just that food chain, I'm going to think, what would eat that rabbit? So it would be a fox. So this would come up right here on top of that rabbit. Okay, if yours is set up similar to this, that's fine. Okay, I'm going to come back down here to the bottom, and I know from my cards that a grasshopper is going to eat grass. I'm going to put that right in here. Okay. Next, if I think about what eats a grasshopper, I know that a mouse would eat a grasshopper. Put the mouse right here. Okay, you should have 2 left, birds and owl. Okay, I know that birds also eat grasshoppers, so I'm going to kind of put these birds right here. And the owl, being one of the larger animals in this food web, is going to go to the top because an owl is going to eat a couple things in here. Okay. So we're going to put our owl kind of at the top. All right. Now for our arrows. So if we start down here with the carrot, we know that the carrot is going to give energy up to that rabbit. Okay, I'm going to pull you in a little bit closer so you can see. The rabbit is going to give energy up to that fox. Okay, the grass is going to give energy to the grasshopper, but it's also going to give energy to the rabbit. Okay. This grasshopper is going to give energy to the birds. These birds are actually going to give energy to the fox over here. The grasshopper is also going to give energy to the mouse. This mouse is going to give energy to the owl. Okay? We come over here to our grains. The grains also give energy to the mouse. Okay? So looking at this food web, we see that all of these things are very much intertwined. Now again, if we were going to come in here and label our producers, primary consumers, and secondary consumers, we could come in here and do that. So I'm going to give you a couple more seconds. I want you to try to identify them in here, and then we're going to label them with our cards. All right, so you should remember that your producers are going to be down here at the bottom. So in this food web, the carrot would be your producer, the grass would be your producer, and grains would also be a producer. Remember, producers get their energy from the sun. Now, where would your primary consumers be? So the primary consumers are the ones that eat those producers. Very good. They're going to be the next level up. So your primary consumers would be the rabbit. It would be the grasshopper. And another primary consumer would be the mouse if it was eating these grains. If you're going in that food chain, the mouse would be primary. If you were looking at a different food chain, the grass to the grasshopper to the mouse, it would be a secondary consumer. And where would our secondary consumer be? Very good. The secondary consumer would be at the top. Okay, so the fox would be secondary right here. The mouse would be secondary here. And depending on the food chain, the owl would be the secondary here. Now, all of these animals make up a specific ecosystem. Okay, within their ecosystems, this would be kind of balanced. If something comes in, it can actually throw off the balance of an ecosystem and of this food web. So if something becomes overgrown, like if the carrots are overgrown, or if there are too many rabbits, it can actually throw off the dynamics of a food web, a food chain, and really could throw off the dynamics of an entire ecosystem. So keeping everything in balance is actually very important. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here. I'm going to actually show you a small video, and the video actually is going to show you what happens when wolves were reintroduced to an ecosystem. So they were brought back into Yellowstone National Park, and it's just this amazing video, and it's going to show you how a different kind of look at an ecosystem and how it can positively affect it. So let's take a look at that video really quickly.